My father-in-law shook my hand at dinner and said, "Thanks for taking care of my daughter all these years. Now it's time for a real man to step in." He gestured to her ex-boyfriend. The family clapped. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and said 3 words that made him collapse. But to truly comprehend the sheer, unadulterated devastation of that specific moment, we have to rewind the tape. We have to go back 7 years to understand why those 3 simple words completely destroyed a man who thought he was untouchable, and why a family that treated me like dirt finally got exactly what they deserved. My father-in-law, Richard, was a man who believed the world owed him its undivided attention. He was the kind of guy who measured a person's worth by the size of their truck, the volume of their laugh, and the aggressive firmness of their handshake. He was a large, imposing figure who smoked cheap, foul-smelling cigars, and wore suits that were tailored just a little too tight to show off his barrel chest. Richard owned a regional freight and logistics company called Sterling Freight. In his mind, he wasn't just a business owner, he was a kingmaker. He operated his family like a 1920s mob boss. If you weren't loud, brash, and aggressively macho, you were weak. And then there was Julian. Julian was my wife Elena's ex-boyfriend. To Richard, Julian was the absolute gold standard of masculinity. Julian was a former high school star quarterback who peaked at 21. He rode a custom Harley Davidson, had a jawline that belonged in a cologne commercial, and possessed the personality of an overexcited golden retriever with a severe gambling addiction. Richard absolutely adored him. Julian was the son he never had. He was the real man. The only glaring problem with Julian was that he was chronically broke, persistently unfaithful, and had abandoned Elena when she needed him the most. When Julian skipped town to chase some fraudulent crypto startup pipe dream in Miami, he left Elena with a shattered heart, a broken lease, and $30,000 in shared credit card debt that he had secretly racked up in her name. That is exactly when I entered the picture. My name is Arthur. I am not a loud man. I don't wear flashy Rolex watches, I don't yell at waiters, and I drive a 6-year-old Volvo because it's safe and reliable. I work in private equity, specifically specializing in distressed assets, corporate restructuring, and hostile takeovers. My brain operates in spreadsheets, risk assessments, and quiet, highly calculated moves. I met Elena at a local coffee shop where she was crying over a final notice collection bill. I paid for her coffee, sat with her, and listened. Over the next year, we fell in love. I paid off her crushing debt without a second thought. I provided the stability she had never known. I bought us a beautiful, modern home in a quiet suburb, gave her a peaceful life, and offered unconditional support. We got married 2 years later in a small, elegant ceremony. But to Richard, I was always a massive disappointment. I wasn't a man's man. I didn't want to go drinking at loud sports bars. I didn't care about his fantasy football league, and I refused to go hunting with his buddies. During family gatherings, I was constantly the butt of his thinly veiled jokes. Arthur's probably thinking about his little spreadsheets again. Richard would boom across the Thanksgiving table, slapping my back hard enough to rattle my teeth. "We need to get this boy out in the woods. Put some hair on his chest." I always took it on the chin. I smiled politely, sipped my water, and let him have his moment. I loved Elena deeply, and I firmly believed that a successful marriage meant dealing with toxic in-laws with grace and maturity. 4 years into our marriage, the global economy shifted violently. Fuel prices skyrocketed overnight. Unprecedented supply chain issues choked the logistics industry, and Richard's beloved company, Sterling Freight, hit a massive brick wall. Richard had always been arrogant and reckless with his money. When times were good, he leveraged everything to buy a fleet of brand new luxury trucks and a lakeside vacation home he couldn't actually afford. When the market dipped, the bank came knocking. He was suddenly 3 months behind on his massive commercial loans. Foreclosure was imminent. The king was about to lose his castle, his company, his lake house, and most importantly, his oversized pride. Elena came to me in tears one rainy Tuesday night. "My dad is going to lose everything, Arthur. The bank is calling in the commercial loans. It's over $4 million. He's talking about declaring bankruptcy. He looks like he hasn't slept in weeks." I looked at my wife, seeing the genuine, heartbreaking pain in her eyes, and I made a decision. It was a decision that, looking back, was the most foolish mistake of my personal life, but also the ultimate weapon I would later wield to exact my revenge. I told Elena I would quietly look into his finances, but privately, I did so much more. I knew Richard's fragile ego couldn't handle taking a handout from the quiet, boring son-in-law he openly despised. He would rather go bankrupt than admit he needed my help, so I used my professional connections. Through my firm, I set up a blind trust and an anonymous holding company called Apex Financial Solutions. Acting as Apex, I swooped in and bought all of Sterling Freight's distressed debt from the regional bank for pennies on the dollar. Overnight, I became Richard's sole creditor. Then, acting as this anonymous, benevolent corporate entity based out of a P.O. box in Delaware, I aggressively restructured his loans. I slashed his interest rates by half, gave him a generous 6-month grace period on principal payments, and even injected $500,000 of operational capital to keep his trucks rolling. Richard thought it was an absolute miracle. He thought some hotshot New York investment firm saw his brilliant business acumen and decided to save his legacy. He strutted around family dinners like a peacock, bragging incessantly about how his company was so incredibly valuable that Wall Street elites were practically begging to fund him. He never knew that the Wall Street elite was sitting quietly across the dinner table, eating dry turkey and letting him keep his pride. I owned his company. I owned his warehouse. I held the deed to his vacation home, and I owned the mortgage on his 6-bedroom primary mansion. But I kept it an absolute secret, purely out of love for my wife. Fast forward to 6 months ago. The catalyst for the explosion arrived. Julian moved back to town. He rolled up to a family barbecue in a leased white BMW, sporting a fake tan, a set of glaringly bright veneers, and claiming he had made a killing in digital assets and NFTs. It was all cheap smoke and mirrors, but Richard bought it hook, line, and sinker. Instantly, Julian was the prodigal son returning home. He was invited to every family barbecue. He was invited to Sunday dinners. He was invited to Richard's poker nights. And slowly, terrifyingly, I started noticing a massive shift in Elena. It started with small, easily excusable things. She would stay late at work for meetings. She abruptly changed the passcode on her iPhone. When I walked into a room, she would suddenly lock her screen and place the phone face down on the counter. Then came the gaslighting. Whenever I brought up Julian's constant, overbearing presence at her parents' house, she would roll her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. "Arthur, please stop being so insecure and paranoid," she would sigh. "Julian is just an old family friend. My dad likes having him around. Don't be so controlling. It's not a good look on you." But as I mentioned earlier, I am a man who deals in cold, hard data. I don't do paranoia. I do extensive due diligence. I hired one of the most expensive and discreet private investigators in the state. I gave him a retainer and told him to follow my wife. 2 weeks later, a thick manila envelope was sitting squarely on my mahogany office desk. The contents inside were sickening enough to make my stomach turn. There were high-definition photos of Elena and Julian walking hand in hand into a boutique luxury hotel downtown. There were printed transcripts of highly explicit text messages. But the absolute worst part wasn't just the physical affair. It was the calculated conspiracy behind my back. The PI had managed to get crystal clear audio from a public country club patio where Richard, Elena, and Julian were having afternoon drinks. I sat in my quiet, soundproofed office, put on my headphones, and listened to my father-in-law's booming voice plotting my ruin. "You gotta drop the spreadsheet guy, L," Richard had said, laughing heartily as ice clinked in his glass. "Julian's back. He's making real money now. He's a real man. Arthur was just a boring safety net while you got on your feet. You divorce him, take half of his little stock investments in that house, and you and Julian can start fresh. My company is booming anyway. Apex Financial loves me. I can fund Julian's new startup venture once you shake Arthur loose." Elena had laughed. A light, airy, carefree laugh that I hadn't heard from her in years. "I know, Dad. I'm just getting my ducks in a row with my lawyer. I need to make sure I get the house and the maximum alimony before I drop the bomb on him." My blood ran cold. Then it turned to absolute ice. I didn't scream. I didn't smash my computer monitor. I didn't drive home and confront her in a screaming match. I simply opened a fresh Excel spreadsheet. I titled it Project Demolition. For the next 3 months, I played the role of the perfect, oblivious, loving husband. It was the hardest acting job of my life, but my discipline is absolute. I smiled warmly at Julian when he showed up at family events. I nodded politely when Richard openly insulted my boring desk job. I kissed Elena on the forehead every single morning before I left for work, telling her I loved her. Behind the scenes, I was a financial surgeon systematically cutting off their life support. First, I went to my bulldog divorce attorney. Thankfully, when Elena and I married, I had insisted on a rock-solid, ironclad prenuptial agreement to protect my premarital assets, which included my equity firm. Because we lived in an at-fault state, and I had undeniable, irrefutable proof of her infidelity, she was legally entitled to absolutely nothing. No alimony, no house, not a single dime of my portfolio. I signed the divorce papers in blue ink and had my lawyer hold them, ready to file at my command. Next, I put on my Apex Financial Solutions hat. I sat down with my corporate lawyers and meticulously reviewed Richard's loan covenants. Richard, true to his nature, was arrogant, lazy, and sloppy. He had missed 2 seemingly minor technical reporting deadlines. He hadn't submitted his quarterly audited financials to my holding company on time. In the grand scheme of business, most lenders overlook this. But according to the strict, legally binding terms of his commercial loan agreement, this constituted a material breach and an event of default. I drafted a formal, legally binding notice of default and acceleration. This document legally demanded the immediate, full repayment of the $4.2 million he owed Apex Financial within exactly 24 hours. Failure to comply would result in the immediate seizure of all listed collateral: the commercial trucks, the massive warehouse, the lake house, and his personal home. I set the email to automatically send to Richard, his chief financial officer, and his personal attorney at exactly 8 p.m. on a Friday night. Not just any Friday night. The exact same Friday as Richard's massive 60th birthday dinner at the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive country club in the city. The evening of the dinner finally arrived. The country club was dripping with old money pretension. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, velvet drapery lined the walls, and a private dining room had been rented out so Richard could show off his supposed wealth to his peers. Elena wore a stunning, backless red dress. She looked incredibly beautiful and completely, utterly dead to me. I arrived quietly and took my assigned seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. The entire extended family was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates. And, of course, Julian. Richard had actually possessed the sheer audacity to seat Julian right next to Elena, directly across the table from me. It was the ultimate, calculated display of disrespect. They were flaunting it in my face, testing my boundaries. Underneath the table, I could see Julian's foot casually pressing against Elena's leg. They would occasionally share a knowing, secret smirk, glancing at me like I was a clueless, pathetic joke of a man. Throughout the lavish 5-course dinner, the microaggressions flowed as freely as the $1,000 champagne Richard had ordered. "Hey, Arthur," Richard yelled across the length of the table, his face flushed red with alcohol and arrogance. "You should really ask Julian for some investment tips tonight. The kid's making millions in the crypto space. Maybe you can finally upgrade that ancient, depressing Volvo of yours." The entire table erupted in laughter. Julian offered a faux humble shrug, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Hey, it takes a certain risk tolerance, Richard. Not everyone has the stomach for the big leagues. Some guys are just built to push pencils." "Exactly," Richard boomed, slamming his fist on the table. "You need a spine! You need grit! You need to be a real man to make real money." I smiled softly, calmly slicing my medium-rare steak. "I prefer guaranteed returns, Julian," I said evenly. "But I do admire your creativity." The grandfather clock in the corner of the room ticked loudly. 7:45 p.m., 7:50 p.m., 7:55 p.m. At exactly 7:58 p.m., the waiters cleared the dinner plates. Richard stood up at the head of the table. He picked up his crystal champagne flute and tapped his silver spoon against it. Ding, ding, ding! The noisy room immediately fell into a respectful silence. He cleared his throat, puffing out his massive chest, completely in his element. "Family, friends," Richard began, his booming voice echoing in the private room. 60 years on this beautiful earth. And let me tell you, I have never felt better, stronger, or richer. Sterling Freight is breaking industry records. We have the backing of the biggest financial players in New York. We are completely untouchable. The family cheered wildly. Elena clapped enthusiastically, her eyes shining with pride for her father. "But tonight," Richard continued, his eyes slowly scanning the room and locking directly onto me. A cruel, malicious, predatory smile spread across his face. He wasn't just going to gloat about his fake success. He was going to execute his master plan. He was going to publicly humiliate me, emasculate me in front of the entire family, and officially welcome Julian back into the fold. He walked slowly down the length of the table, stopping right next to my chair. The room watched in breathless anticipation. Richard reached down and grabbed my right hand. He hauled me to my feet with a surprisingly strong jerk. He didn't let go of my hand, gripping it painfully tight to assert his physical dominance. This brings us to the exact moment. The moment the steel trap finally slammed shut. My father-in-law shook my hand at dinner and said, "Thanks for taking care of my daughter all these years. Now it's time for a real man to step in." He gestured dramatically across the table with his free hand, pointing directly to her ex-boyfriend, Julian. The family clapped. It wasn't just polite, awkward applause. It was enthusiastic, roaring, validating applause. Aunts and uncles were cheering. Elena was looking down, feigning a modest blush, her hand resting affectionately on Julian's muscular arm. Julian was grinning from ear to ear like he had just won the Super Bowl. I stood there for 3 full seconds, letting the humiliating applause wash over me. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt absolutely no betrayal. I only felt the cold, clinical, exhilarating satisfaction of a master surgeon about to make the final, fatal incision. The clock on the wall struck 8 p.m. I smoothly and forcefully pulled my hand out of Richard's crushing grip. I didn't frown. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I simply reached over to the back of my chair and calmly grabbed my tailored wool coat. I slipped it on, slowly adjusting the collar. The room quieted down, vastly confused by my total lack of emotional reaction. They expected tears. They expected a red-faced, screaming outburst. They expected me to run out of the room in absolute shame. Instead, I stepped uncomfortably close to Richard. I looked directly into his eyes, stripping away the carefully crafted mask of the quiet, boring son-in-law. For the first time in 7 years, I let him see the cold-blooded apex predator hiding underneath. I leaned in, ensuring my voice was low, smooth, and chillingly clear. I own everything. Richard frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. What? What the hell are you babbling about, you pathetic loser? Apex Financial Solutions, I whispered, just loud enough for him and Elena to hear. I am Apex, and I just called the loans. Before Richard could even process the syllables leaving my mouth, a sharp, piercing ringtone cut through the dead silent room. It was Richard's cell phone. Then, almost simultaneously, his expensive smartwatch started vibrating violently against his wrist. Richard pulled his phone from his breast pocket, annoyed by the interruption. He looked at the screen. The caller ID flashed in bright red letters. David. CFO, UArgent, emergency. He answered it, putting it to his ear. David? I'm in the middle of my birthday toast. This better be a matter of life, or... Richard stopped speaking. I watched as the blood literally drained from his face in real time. The ruddy, alcohol-fueled flush in his cheeks vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly, chalky, ghost-like gray. His eyes widened to the size of dinner saucers. What do you mean they accelerated the debt? Richard stammered, his booming, alpha male voice suddenly sounding like a terrified, trembling child. What do you mean they sent a foreclosure notice to the house? That's over $4 million. We have a 30-day cure period, right? A long, agonizing pause. The entire room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Immediately! Richard gasped, clutching his chest. His knees visibly buckled, wobbling like jelly. I calmly buttoned my coat. Actually, Richard, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the silent dining room. According to Clause 4B of your restructured forbearance agreement, a missed financial reporting deadline allows the creditor to bypass the 30-day cure period. You have exactly 24 hours to produce $4.2 million in liquid cash, or I seize the trucks, I seize the warehouse, and I seize the roof over your head. Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Arthur? What is he talking about? What is happening right now? I looked at my soon-to-be ex-wife. I reached into my inside coat pocket, pulled out a thick, legally stamped manila envelope. It contained the freshly filed divorce papers, the motion to enforce the prenuptial agreement, and the HD quality printed photos of her and Julian walking into the hotel room. I tossed the heavy envelope onto her empty dinner plate. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud that made her jump. It means you're broke, Elena, I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. And you're served. Enjoy your real man. I turned back to Richard. He was actively hyperventilating, his hand desperately clutching his chest as if he were having a heart attack. The cell phone slipped from his sweaty fingers, clattering onto the floor. You can't do this, Richard wheezed, his legs giving out completely. He collapsed heavily into his chair, looking like a deflated balloon, his massive chest heaving as a full-blown panic attack set in. I'm ruined. You ruined me, Arthur. No, Richard, I replied, turning my back on him and walking towards the exit. You ruined yourself. I just stopped paying the bill. I walked out of the private dining room, the heavy oak double doors swinging shut behind me. As they closed, they cut off the sudden, chaotic explosion of screaming, crying, and absolute panic erupting inside the room. The night air outside the country club was crisp, cool, and incredibly refreshing. I tipped the valet a crisp $100 bill, climbed into my trusty, paid-off Volvo, and drove away into the night. The fallout over the next few weeks was nothing short of biblical. Within 48 hours, Sterling Freight was legally locked down by my aggressive team of corporate lawyers. Richard couldn't move a single pallet of freight or access a single bank account without my express, written authorization, when he inevitably couldn't produce the $4 million. Because Julian, the real man, suddenly packed his bags and vanished back to Miami the exact second he realized the family was utterly destitute. I legally seized every single asset. I ruthlessly liquidated the trucking fleet at auction. I sold his massive warehouse to one of his biggest corporate competitors for a massive profit. I foreclosed on Richard's 6-bedroom mansion and the lake house, evicting him and his wife within 30 days. Elena tried to fiercely fight the divorce, hiring a sleazy lawyer and claiming she deserved half of my wealth because she was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. But when she stood before the stern judge, my lawyer simply presented the ironclad prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's undeniable photos. The judge didn't even blink. He threw her case out of court. She walked away with exactly what she brought into our marriage: Absolutely nothing, plus the mountain of legal fees she now owed her attorney. Last, I heard through the grapevine, Richard is currently renting a small, rundown 2-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. He is working as a low-level, middle management dispatcher for the very same competitor I sold his warehouse to. Every single day, he takes orders from corporate managers half his age, earning minimum wage. Elena tried reaching out to me a few months later from an unknown number. She left a pathetic, tearful 5-minute voicemail begging for my forgiveness. She cried that she had made a terrible, foolish mistake, that she missed our life, and that Julian had stolen her remaining jewelry before fleeing the state. I didn't call her back. I didn't even listen to the whole message. I just hit delete. Instead, I sat on the expansive balcony of my brand new luxury penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I took a slow sip of an expensive, 20-year-old scotch, opened my laptop, and permanently deleted the Excel spreadsheet named Project Demolition. Some men feel the desperate need to be loud to feel powerful. Some men need to chest bump, throw insults, drive massive trucks, and surround themselves with sycophants to feel like they are kings of the world. But true power isn't loud. True power doesn't need a crowd, and it certainly doesn't need applause. True power is sitting quietly in the background, letting the arrogant dig their own graves. True power is standing up, grabbing your coat, and knowing that with 3 simple words, you own the board, you own the pieces, and you have permanently won the game.